Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Peppis. I'm Interim Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Dan Savage, a writer, commentator, journalist, and newspaper editor. Savage writes the internationally syndicated relationship and sex advice column Savage Love. Savage is the author of several books, including American Savage, Insight, Slights, and Fights on Faith, Sex, Love, and Politics, Skipping Towards Gomorrah, The Seven Deadly Sins and the Pursuit of Happiness in America, winner of the Lambda Literary Award for Nonfiction, and The Kid, What Happened When My Boyfriend and I Decided to Get Pregnant, winner of the Penn West Award for Creative Nonfiction. The Kid was adapted into an off-Broadway musical and has recently been optioned for TV production. Savage is the editorial director of The Stranger, Seattle's weekly alternative newspaper, and his writing has appeared widely in publications including The New York Times, GQ, Rolling Stone, The Onion, and Salon.com. In 2010, Savage and his husband, Terry Miller, launched the It Gets Better project to offer hope to bullied LGBTQIA youth. The project has become a global movement, inspiring more than 50,000 user-created videos. Savage and Miller co-edited the It Gets Better book, published in March 2011. In 2012, the It Gets Better project received the Governor's Award at the Creative Arts Emmys. Savage presented Savage Love Live at the U of O on October 15, 2013, as a guest of the University Health Center as they rolled out their sex-positive smartphone app. Dan, thanks for joining us and speaking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
How'd you get into the business of giving sex advice?
I met Tim Keck, who was one of the co-founders of The Onion, right after he'd sold The Onion. Him and his the original other co-founder, Tim and his friend Chris, and Tim was moving to Seattle, Washington to start a newspaper called The Stranger. And I was talking to him and I was like, oh, you should have an advice column because everybody reads those. You see that format and you can't not read it. And he thought that was excellent advice and asked me to write the advice column for his new newspaper, which sounds like I was angling for the gig, and I wasn't. I'd never written anything before in my life. If you read the first year of Savage Love, it would be very clear that I'd never written anything before in my life, but you can't read the first year of Savage Love because it's locked up in a vault somewhere forever. And we started talking about what would be funny and different and new with an advice column, and thought it would be amusing to have a gay guy give sex advice to straight people and treat straight people and straight sex with the same contempt and revulsion that straight advice columnists had always treated gay people and gay sex with. It's like, oh, yuck, ew, straight sex and straight people, ew, but here's some advice, and please stop bothering me about your disgusting sex practices. And this was a new experience for straight people to be treated with this particular kind of contempt, and they loved it. And the mail started pouring in, and what was originally going to be 6 months or a year, sort of a stunt advice column and a one-note joke became the rest of my life.
Yeah. So you've been writing Savage Love for over 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm giving sex advice now to the children of people I gave sex advice to when the column started, which is freaking me out.
So how have the questions changed over the years?
Well, the column predates and postdates the internet, Google, and Wiki. So half the mail, it's a lot harder to write an advice column now. Half the mail back in the day, the pre-internet era, was what's a butt plug? Where's the BDSM group in my town? How do I perform this sex act? And you would write, like, this is what a butt plug is, and this is how it works. And this is where you would, because I would keep all the sort of like obscure sex journals and magazines from all over the country and zines. I had these reference materials. I knew where everything was that other people couldn't find. So someone would write me from Atlanta, and I would let them know where the BDSM clubs or the swingers groups were in Atlanta. Now you don't get those questions anymore because people just Google it. So every question is sort of situational ethics. This is who I am, this is who my partner is, this is what happened, this is what I did, this is what she did or he did, who's right, who's wrong, and you have to like go in like Solomon and cut babies in half all day long for a living. And that's harder to write. What's a butt plug? That's easy to write. So the column is actually much more difficult now to do than it was 20 years ago.
So more recently, you've also produced the weekly Savage Lovecast, and you've been traveling to high schools and colleges across the U.S. and
Colleges,
Canada.
never high schools.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
so colleges across the U.S. and Canada present Savage Love Live. From that unique vantage, how has sex and sexuality changed among college students?
Well, people, when they arrive at kind of that period of sexual freedom and self-discovery after high school into college, that's when they have the most questions. That's when they're hitting the wall, usually. That's when they realize they can be who they want to be, hopefully, and like let go sort of performing this version of themselves, which was very high school and very much, you know, when you're embedded in your family. And that kind of doesn't change. That people are invested in being normal, which doesn't exist, normal doesn't exist. And as Jesse Baring, author of the new book Perv, says, normal's just a number. Why do we put so much emphasis and weight on it when it comes to sexuality? And people have a hard time at that stage of life, and that really hasn't changed. That said, young people, college students, much more kink aware and kink positive, much more supportive of LGBT, LFTS, Q again, IA, equality. We're going to start singing the alphabet song eventually and be done with it. Than kids were, when I was in college. I came out at 18 in high school, the end of high school, and that was really rare for gay men of my generation. And I went to college and I was the only out gay guy in my acting department at my university. Everybody else was gay, but nobody came out till after college. Now kids are coming out in middle school and high school. So kids arrive at college already knowing queer people, and it really has changed their perspective.
Interesting. Why is it important to discuss sex and sexuality in public fora, such as the column and these public appearances?
AIDS. Not to boil it down to too depressing sort of a bullet point, but I came out in 1981, 82, and then AIDS slammed into the world. And there was this sex that we all agreed people ought to be having, and we all pretended in public that that was the sex that we ourselves are having, that everyone else is having, and we wrote about sex as if, publications and advice columnists and serious books, people wrote about sex as if we all agree that this is sex and we all are having this, right? This particular kind of sex. Hetero, missionary, vaginal, matrimonial. And then AIDS came along and we suddenly had to have a conversation about the sex people were actually having because it was suddenly a life or death issue. And being able to discuss these things honestly and openly would save lives, was crucial. And we had to stop this sort of pretense. We had to stop speaking about sex in this Sanskrit that we spoke about it when we spoke about it in public. And that was what was kind of revolutionary about my column, if I do say so myself when it started, is I let people use the language they actually used when they talked about sex with their friends in my column. In print, and that was new and different. And it was AIDS that did it. And it was really an interesting time to sort of be alive and sexually active because despite the dangers and the risks, suddenly the whole world turned upside down in a day. Because there was normal sex, vaginal penetration for the straight people, the breeders as we called them then, and anal intercourse for the gay dudes. And suddenly normal sex was so much riskier than these other kinds of sex that we had been told were dirty and disgusting and perverted. Suddenly, if you were having anal intercourse, you were at much greater risk than if you were just doing bondage and S&M and not having penetrative sex at all. So suddenly, everything that had been stigmatized as dangerous and unhealthy, emotionally, sexually, was healthier and less dangerous than the stuff that had always been sort of elevated as normative.
Yeah, interesting. You've described Savage Love Live as a stand-up comedy version of your column and podcast. And I think anybody who's listened to you or watched you knows how that comedy is part of what you do. Well, so why is comedy useful?
Well, I'm not a comedian.
I know you're not, but you're funny.
Funny in the moment in this weird panicky way. I can't sit down and write a joke, but somehow things sometimes fly out of my mouth. Sometimes things fly out of my mouth that get me in trouble, but sometimes things fly out of my mouth that are funny in the moment. Sex makes us nervous. Sex makes us tense. Sex is scary. I once got a question at a college speaking event, like a Savage Love Live, from somebody who said, I'm a virgin and I want to be sexually active, but I'm scared of sex. How do I get over that? I want to not be scared of sex anymore. And my answer was, you should be scared of sex. I'm still scared of sex. Sex is dangerous. It can kill you dead. Intimate partner violence, sexually transmitted infections, unplanned pregnancies. Sex can really screw your life up, and you should approach it with some fear and trembling. You should be afraid, and then mitigate for the risks, and then you jump, right? You should be afraid of dinner. People die of listeria poisoning all the time. We still eat chicken, we just cook it if we're smart. But sex makes us tense, and we have to have a release. We have to laugh and sort of acknowledge our shared sort of, not just our shared humanity, but our shared plight. We're screwed. Sex is bigger and stronger than we are. One of the phrases I always try to attack when I do public speaking is, you have it in your head that you're going to grow up and you're going to have sex. No, you are going to grow up and sex is going to have you. And that powerlessness, like what's the tool of people who are powerless, minority groups, is always humor. Camp, gay humor. You think of the jokes that circulated in the USSR under communism. The really subtle and sly jokes that African Americans told at the expense of crappy white people that flew over their heads during Jim Crow. And why do we joke about sex? Because sex is more powerful than we are. Because we are all to sex what gay people are to the larger culture. And if we can all laugh together about it and then talk about it, it's a little less scary, and you can arm people then when they're relaxed with the tools that they need to mitigate those risks and have the fun that they're going to have.
Really interesting. So you mentioned about you started before the internet and then it came along. Tell me some of the other ways that, from your perspective, the internet has changed sexuality and the way we talk about it.
It's complicated our ideas about adultery and infidelity. Complicated ideas. It's just made adultery and infidelity easier. It's made life more difficult for people who cut their spouses or partners off sexually because people are no longer trapped. The internet is a great big adultery machine, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes being able to get it elsewhere discreetly, safely, easily allows people to stay committed, to stay loyal in another way to their partner than loyal sexually. It's also created communities that we didn't know were out there, that of people who couldn't previously find each other. Furries, for example. There's now a community of furries and fursuit fetishists and mascot costume fetishists, and they were always out there, but in the same way that gay people, 70 years ago, you talk to gay people in their 70s and 80s, you often hear, I thought I was the only one in the world. And it was the gay rights movement that exploded that, and then gay people knew that there were other gay people. The internet allowed furries to find each other and realize, although they're a much, much smaller minority group, I'm not the only one in the world. Same thing with asexuals. It was really the creation of the Asexuality Visibility Network, the creation of a website with some comment boards that created this awareness and community around asexuality and asexual identity that hadn't, asexuals had always been out there, but they hadn't existed as sort of a political and social force before the internet came along. The internet has that power. It also made us realize that there are a lot more people out there who are situationally homosexual. It brought back trade in this weird way. Trade, 100 years ago, pre even the earliest rumblings of the gay rights movement, were straight guys who would allow themselves to be serviced by gay men. You weren't gay if you were getting filleted. You were gay if you were filleting. And there are a lot of straight guys and married men, married to women men, which now we have to qualify, which itself is progress, right? Online looking for free fellatio. And so trade is back, which is really interesting in different ways. Like, I get into this rabbit hole. I'm not interested in filleting straight guys myself. I like fags. But when the gay rights movement came along, the modern gay rights movement, really post-Stonewall, it kind of boxed in straight guys in this weird way. It made sort of intimate contact between men suspect, even non-sexual. But there was a lot of homoeroticism sort of that straight men were allowed to perform and really found comfort in. Like, straight guys like to touch each other. Men, straight guys used to be able to have intimate friendships the way women did, and post-Stonewall that dried up and died. And you see that coming back, which is real progress. Anyway, wow, how did I get there?
Interesting. So
marijuana is legal now in Washington State. Maybe that's how I got there.
So you've mentioned just in passing the changes in marriage, and obviously the cause of marriage equality has advanced in the past couple of years far faster than many ever believed that it would happen. I mean, it's
faster than I believed. I've been arguing for it for 20 years, and I can't believe that we're at this point.
So do you think that progress will just continue unabated until it's a national,
Yes.
nationally?
We're waiting for a state Supreme Court decision tomorrow in Michigan that could legalize same-sex marriage in Michigan, which is creepy, which is a hostile state to LGBT people. There was this run in Pennsylvania on county clerks who said they were just going to start issuing marriage licenses. Same thing in New Mexico, and now North Carolina, which only last year passed an anti-gay marriage amendment to their constitution. People want to be free, and people in North Carolina are looking at what people in Iowa and Washington State, Massachusetts, and New York are able to do, and they want it too, and they are going to have it.
So do you think there's been unintended negative effects from a marriage equality campaign?
No,
Fair enough.
There are people out there who do.
Yeah.
I think some of those people are disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out there who are queer, who are opposed to marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I have a heterosexual
Because
brother.
it's too normative, it's too hetero.
Yeah, assimilationist, heteronormative. We should be, the queer movement was about liberation and destabilizing and creating our own forms of family and waka waka waka, which we still have the ability to do. I have a heterosexual older brother who opposes marriage. He is not married to his partner of many, many years. They don't even live together, but they spend most of their time together and they love each other and they are committed to each other. He opposes marriage for himself. He doesn't oppose marriage for our other brother who is legally married to his spouse. You can take a stand against marriage and still let other people be free to make their own choices. But there's some people in the queer movement who want to dictate terms to other people in the queer movement. Say, oh, you're doing queer wrong. And some of them don't have the courage just to say that they oppose marriage, root and branch, but they want to say, oh, we should have other priorities. Why are we focusing on marriage? We should be focusing on X. And you're a bad person if you're working on marriage because look at this other thing. As if a movement can't push on more than one front at one time. I've worked on marriage. I've thrown a lot of my writing time and activist time into marriage, but I also focused on the It Gets Better project and the bullying of LGBTQ youth. So they're not mutually exclusive. You can work on more than one thing at once. And if there's something you're more passionate about, go effing do that.
So you brought up the It Gets Better project. So tell us what led to your work on that project.
It was the suicide of Billy Lucas in Greensburg, Indiana. We launched the project because of him. While we were pulling it together and creating that first video, registering the domain name, there were more suicides. So often what's said is the It Gets Better project was a response to a spate of suicides, and it wasn't. It was a response to one, to Billy Lucas, who is 15 years old and growing up in Greensburg, Indiana. He may not have been gay. Not all victims of anti-LGBT violence or bullying are gay. But he was perceived to be gay, bullied relentlessly all through middle school and high school, told to kill himself, told that God hated him, called a faggot, and told he was an embarrassment to his family and his community. Well, he went home and hanged himself in his grandmother's barn. And I was so, reading about what happened to him, so gutted and really devastated. And then reading about what happened after his family created a Facebook memorial page for him, where the same kids who had succeeded in bullying him to death went to the Facebook memorial page and said they were glad he was dead, called him a faggot one more time, celebrated his death in front of his grieving parents. And I was so angry, and I wrote this really angry post about it, and there was a commenter whose handle at The Stranger is Despicable Me, and she wrote this thing, and I can't even talk about it even almost 3 years later without getting weepy. And she wrote, I wished I had known you, Billy, and been able to tell you that things get better. Rest in peace. And that phrase, things get better, sort of leapt out at me because it was true. And I wished, you read that post and looked at those stories about Billy going, I wish I could have talked to that kid for 5 minutes. I wish I could have told him what I knew from my adult perspective. Because when a queer kid kills himself or herself, part of what that kid's saying, a big part of what that kid's saying is they can't picture a future with enough joy in it to compensate for the pain they're in today. And the lies that they're told and how isolated they are from information or role models are devastating because they're told that gay people are unhappy. They're told that gay people are miserable. And if you don't know any gay people, and you're gay and you're 14 or 13 years old and growing up in a rural area, you might believe that. And so if you're miserable at 13 and you believe what your preachers and teachers and parents have told you, which is that gay people are miserable all their lives, why stick around?
How did things get better for you?
I came out. I get in trouble sometimes with queer activists when I say this, like the hardcore queer activists. It's funny, some weeks, like last week, I was attacked by queer activists at a campus where I went to speak, and then at the end of the week I was attacked at the Values Voters Summit. So it was like fundamentalist Christians attacking me and queers attacking me. Queers saying I'm a assimilationist, sellout, heteronormative, biphobic, transphobic, anti-gay, and values voter, fundamentalist Christian conservative saying I'm this like queer radical danger threat to the family and all things good and decent. But it got better for me because the straight people in my life got better about me. That's how it's gotten better for us. Straight people have gotten better about us. And they got better about us because they got to know us, or they got to know that they knew us. Because straight people always knew queer people. They didn't know they knew queer people because the queer people in their lives weren't out. We came out, sometimes at great personal professional risk, and demanded that straight people change and stop putting up with it. And they did. They moved. They changed. So I'm not crediting straight people with the successes of the queer rights movement. Queer people did it. We made it happen. But straight people came around. So how did it get better for me? My parents, my mother, who initially wasn't that into it, came around really quickly, saw that, was able to make the leap for my boyfriend that she could always make for my sisters. You know, she would look at my sister's boyfriend and see a future, maybe kids, marriage, family, and that relationship wasn't purely sexual because there was all this other stuff that can come from a straight relationship. She would look at my boyfriend and she would see gay sex, because that's all that could come from this relationship, right? And I would say to her sometime that summer when I first came out, when you look at Laura and her boyfriend, you don't see her boyfriend's dick in her mouth. Can you do the same for my boyfriend? And she eventually got there, and my siblings got there. And, you know, sometimes, do you mind if I go on for a minute? Growing up and being gay, and I went to a Catholic seminary, I knew some other kids who were gay, and coming out when I did as a teenager, meeting some other gay teenagers, and some people who were train wrecks, and some people who didn't make it because of AIDS, because of self-destructiveness. I kind of, after a while, got an impression there were two kinds of people, and people like me were likelier to survive. There were the people who looked at themselves in the world and thought, you know, there's something really wrong with me because I'm a dyke, or I'm queer, or I'm trans. I'm sick and sinful and perverse, and there's something terribly wrong with me. And then there were people like me and some of my friends who were like, oh, we're fine. Everybody else is a mess. Everybody else has their head in their butt, but I'm fine. So when I was 15 years old, I didn't think, oh, I'm a terrible person because I'm gay. I thought, oh, the church is wrong, and my parents are wrong, and my siblings are wrong, and the guys on the TV are wrong. I'm fine, and I'll be all right. Everybody else is going to have to change.
Interesting. So do you think that it's given all that, have you found that for the young people that you've spoken about, it's different for them because of all these changes? That is to say, to be that queer kid now is
it's a best of times, worst of times for queer kids. If you're a queer kid and you're growing up in a place like Eugene, if you're growing up in a place like Seattle or Chicago or New York, not that you won't have challenges, not that you won't encounter jerks, but if you're a queer kid in one of those places and you go to a school that has a gay-straight alliance and you're able to be out to your parents and they love and support you and they have your back and you have some friends in your life who love you for exactly who you are, even if there's some kids at your school who are jerks to you, there's never been a better time to be a queer kid than right now, if you're that queer kid. If you're a queer kid growing up in a rural or exurban area and you go to a public school or a private school that not only doesn't have a GSA but blocks the formation of one, and bullying is tolerated at your school or encouraged or participated in by the administration and the teachers, and your family is homophobic and hostile or transphobic and hostile, there's never been a worse time to be a queer kid than right now. David Sedaris wrote this great essay for the It Gets Better book, talking about how when he was a little queer weirdo kid growing up in North Carolina, nobody called him gay because nobody knew what gay was, and he was able to fly under the radar. No queer kid is able to fly under the radar anymore because there's this hyper awareness of LGBT issues and sexuality, and kids are scrutinizing each other in a way that 40 years ago they didn't. Not that there weren't kids who were bullied 40 years ago for being sissies and queer, there were, but not to the extent that kids are hyper vigilant and aware. And then you have these kids who feel empowered to bully and abuse queer kids because of what they're being told by their parents and their preachers. They're being told at their megachurches on Sunday that gay people, by dint of existing, are an existential threat to their family, that we, just by existing, are attacking them. They watch their parents beat up gay people at the ballot box. They watch their parents beat up gay people with their checkbook. And then they go to school and there's that gay kid. And they feel that they have a right to beat that gay kid up in the same way their parents are beating up gay people at the ballot box.
So you've antagonized, clashed with social conservatives. And to say that is almost an understatement for you. But it's also the case that you've also engaged them in discussions about marriage equality and healthcare. Tell us a little bit about this debate you had with Brian Brown, the director of the National Organization for
Marriage.
God.
That was the worst day of my life.
Was it really? Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
it was really tense. Brian Brown's the head of the National Organization for Marriage. He's one of America's top anti-gay bigots. Hopefully soon we'll live in a country where you can't make $500,000 a year being an anti-gay bigot. I spoke at a high school journalism conference to, I think, 3,000 students, this huge conference in Seattle, where I was told before I went out not to pull any punches and to be myself and to not patronize them or talk down, not to edit myself. So I got onto the Bible because I was there to talk about anti-gay bullying, and you can't avoid religion and its role. And I said that there was BS in the Bible, although can I say the whole thing that I said, or
No,
should I keep it
keep
it polite?
Yeah.
I said there's BS, but I used the whole 8-letter word in the Bible, and the whole world exploded. That's one of those times when you just like delete your Twitter from your phone for a while, and it was all over Fox News. And Brian Brown challenged me to a debate. He said, and 22 kids walked out of my speech with 3,000 kids, and that became this mass walkout and the like lie machine that is the religious right and the conservative media. I was speaking at a Christian high school, and none of that was true. And all the Christian kids walked out. There were 3,000 kids, most of them who stayed were Christian. And it got a standing O, the speech. Like, I didn't offend everybody. But I did apologize to the kids who walked out, because I described the walkout as a pansy-ass move, where I was sort of being like ironic and using an anti-sort of gay term to describe what these people were doing. Anyway, I apologized for that, because that was name-calling, and I shouldn't have done that. But Brian Brown challenged me to a debate. And he said, you can name the time and the place, anytime, anywhere. And their whole shtick now is they're the oppressed ones and we're the intolerant ones. And I knew instantly what he wanted was for me to fill a theater with queer people who would boo and hiss and not let him talk. And then he would release a video of the people screaming at him and say, who are the intolerant ones? And so I countered with, okay, anytime, any place, my house after dinner. I will acknowledge your humanity by extending my hospitality. You have to acknowledge mine by accepting it. And I didn't expect him to say yes. I didn't expect him to walk into my trap. Like, he had tried to set a trap for me, like fill a theater with screaming queers and give me what I want. And I knew that even if I lost the debate, I would win on the optics if he came into our house and met my family and we were videotaping it. So I thought he'd say no, and he said yes. So here's where this is why it was the worst day of my life. Because I had to go home and tell Terry that I had invited Brian Brown to dinner. Because I hadn't thought to run it by him, because I didn't think Brian Brown would say yes. And I got to say, guess who's coming to dinner? And then I said Brian Brown, and Terry was very not happy with me. Terry was really brutally bullied. Christian schools, a small town in rural Washington State near the Idaho border. And his adult life since he was 18 has been about walling himself off from that kind of ugliness and protecting himself from it.
So I'm sorry to say that I have to stop you now.
Oh no,
really? I wish we could keep going, but I'm out
I didn't
of
even.
time.
So you have to read the book to find out what else happened. The Brian Brown debate. It's on YouTube.
Did he hear you?
Yeah, he heard me. We argued with each other. There's this argument always about who won the debate. A lot of people in the religious right say we won the debate, just on the optics alone. But if you want to find out who really won the debate, read the book, read the chapter "Bigot Christmas" on Brian Brown, and you will find out that Terry won the debate.
Okay. We've been speaking with Dan Savage. He writes the internationally syndicated relationship and sex advice column Savage Love and co-created the It Gets Better project. Savage presented Savage Love live at UO on October 15th, 2013 as guest of the University Health Center as they rolled out their sex-positive smartphone app. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.